Last Thursday, Cardi B jumped on a last-minute X Spaces session, and by the time she hung up, she'd denied a years-old cheating rumor, thrown out a brand-new allegation about her own ex-husband, mocked another rapper's love life in front of thousands of live listeners, and promised she still has, in her words, something in the tuck for later. The rapper she spent that entire session tearing into wasn't a stranger. It was BIA. And if you've paid even loose attention to hip-hop over the last 3 years, you already know these two have been here before. What makes this round different is timing, tone, and the fact that neither woman seems interested in letting this one fade quietly the way the last few rounds eventually did. So what actually set this off? Why does it keep coming back after multiple apparent ceasefires? And what does BIA's one-line reply that started the whole thing actually mean? Let's get into what happened, and then go back far enough to understand why it happened again. Here's the actual trigger, and it's smaller than the explosion that followed it. Sometime last Thursday, a fan on X posted an old clip of BIA previewing her Cardi diss track, the one titled "Sue Me," captioning it with something close to disbelief that the song was ever released. Most artists would let a comment like that pass. BIA didn't. She replied directly, standing behind the track, telling the commenter to talk about how the accusations in it were, in her words, all true. That's it. That's the whole spark. A defensive reply to a random post, not a new diss, not a fresh call-out, just BIA refusing to back down from bars she'd already put out into the world. Within hours, Cardi was live on X Spaces, and what came out over the next stretch was clearly not something she'd been sitting on quietly. She opened by addressing the cheating rumor at the center of BIA's diss track directly, the claim that Cardi had been unfaithful throughout her marriage to Offset, denying it outright. Then, she went further than denial. She said she'd since learned that during that same marriage, Offset had been involved with someone close to BIA, a friend she didn't name. That's a serious, personal allegation, and it's important to be precise about what it actually is. Something Cardi said publicly and directly on that call, not something confirmed by Offset, by the unnamed friend, or by any independent source. It's Cardi's claim, stated as fact by her, about her own marriage and someone she says was involved in it. From there, she moved into BIA's background specifically, questioning her street credibility by pointing out she's from what Cardi called a good part of Boston, before naming a handful of artists she said actually inspire her: Rihanna, Lady Gaga, Beyonce, Madonna. A list clearly constructed to make one specific omission obvious. She also brought up a rumored relationship between BIA and Washington Wizards player Cam Whitmore, mocking the roughly 13-year age gap between them in blunt terms. It's worth noting, BIA has never actually confirmed that relationship. The closest she's come is posting a video with Whitmore to her own Instagram back in 2025, set to one of her own songs, which fans read as a soft confirmation without her ever saying so directly in words. Before ending the session, Cardi made a point of naming other female rappers as future targets too, and floated that whatever she's holding back might surface on her next album. BIA didn't stay quiet either. Within a day, she was back on X, flatly denying one specific piece of Cardi's rant: the idea that she'd ever been romantically involved with Offset herself, a distinct claim from the one about her unnamed friend. Beyond that direct denial, she mostly held her ground rather than escalating further, standing by the substance of her original diss track the same way she had in the tweet that started all of this. So as it stands right now, you have two women publicly disagreeing about a private marriage neither the public nor, apparently, most of the people actually involved have confirmed the full truth of, playing out entirely through screenshots, Spaces recordings, and reply guys. That's the state of things this week. To understand why one throwaway tweet was enough to detonate all of that, you have to go back to where BIA and Cardi actually started. because this has never really been about a diss track. It's been building for 3 years. Rewind to 2020 and 2021, and BIA wasn't positioned anywhere near Cardi's orbit as a rival. She was, by most accounts, including her own old since deleted tweets, a fan. Her breakout single, Whole Lotta Money, blew up on TikTok that year, and the song's real commercial life started when Nicki Minaj hopped on a remix that summer, pushing it into the top 20 of the Hot 100. That's the moment worth pausing on, because it doesn't mean anything without understanding the other rivalries sitting underneath it. Nicki Minaj and Cardi B have been feuding, on and off, since around 2017, not long after Cardi's own breakout single made her an overnight star. Their conflict has run through guest verses fans read as subliminal disses, a physical altercation at a New York Fashion Week party, and years of family-targeted insults traded across social media, making it one of the most publicized rivalries in modern hip-hop. So the moment BIA started showing up on Nicki Minaj tracks, she wasn't just picking a collaborator. In the eyes of a large chunk of Cardi's fanbase, she was stepping into a minefield with a predetermined side already drawn on the map, whether that was her intention or not. Old tweets of BIA praising Cardi resurfaced, framed online as evidence of a switch-up. BIA addressed it directly on a TikTok live at the time, saying plainly that she didn't actually know Cardi personally, had never spoken to her, and that people online were manufacturing beef out of a business relationship with someone else entirely. Cardi never publicly responded to that particular live. For a while, that seemed to be the end of it. It helps to know a little about who BIA actually is outside of this specific conflict, because most of the online conversation treats her purely as a character in Cardi's story rather than an artist with her own decade-long arc. She's of Afro-Puerto Rican descent, got her start in 2014 on a T.I.-produced reality show called Sisterhood of Hip Hop, and spent years building a catalog of mixtapes and features, including collaborations with J Balvin and Kali Uchis, well before Whole Lotta Money ever went viral. Rihanna publicly praised her work at one point during that stretch too. That background matters here mainly because it undercuts one specific line of attack that's become common in this feud. The idea that BIA is a viral one-hit act riding a Nicki Minaj feature, when the actual timeline shows an artist who'd already been grinding for the better part of a decade before that remix ever existed. It wasn't the end of it though. In 2023, both artists released songs within a short window of each other that sampled the same 1999 Missy Elliott record, splitting fan bases into arguments over who'd copied whom. Cardi maintained her version had actually been recorded before BIA's track came out, and Missy Elliott herself seemed to wave off the entire dispute, replying to a fan's post about it with a single heart. That should have settled it. Instead, it planted a seed, and by 2024, hip-hop's self-declared Year of Beef. That seed had grown into something sharper. BIA released a project fans and press pointed to as bearing real similarity to one of Cardi's own singles, Enough, questioning openly whether the resemblance was coincidence or something closer to creative borrowing. The exact same kind of accusation that had swirled around the two of them a year earlier over the Missy Elliott sample, just pointed in the opposite direction this time. Cardi, meanwhile, released her own track that year interpolating that same Missy Elliott record again, a full year after BIA had sampled it, reopening the original 2023 argument at the same time the EP similarity claims were spreading. Somewhere in that same stretch, ghostwriter accusations entered the picture too, with BIA suggesting Cardi didn't write her own material, a genuinely loaded claim in hip-hop, where authorship is treated as close to sacred, and one that Cardi has pushed back against more than once since. By September of 2025, the subtext became text. Cardi's second studio album, Am I the Drama, arrived with a track called Pretty and Petty, an explicit credited diss aimed directly at BIA, addressing the cheating and ghostwriter claims head-on and taking direct shots at BIA's chart history since her breakout single. It's worth explaining briefly why a diss track actually functions differently than a subliminal jab or a tweet. Because the format itself is a statement, and this feud has actually moved through nearly every rung of that ladder. Rap beefs typically escalate in stages. First come subliminal shots, lines vague enough that an artist can deny they're about anyone specific, which is roughly where BIA and Cardi sat through the Missy Elliott sampling dispute. Next comes direct but informal callouts, tweets, live streams, interview comments, which is where the ghostwriter accusations and TikTok live denials live. Putting a diss on a proper studio album, credited, produced, positioned as an actual song rather than a Lucy or freestyle, is the next rung up, and it signals that the artist considers the conflict significant enough to permanently attach to their official body of work, not just their timeline. That's a bigger commitment than a tweet, because a studio track doesn't disappear the way a deleted post does, and it invites the other artist to respond in kind, rather than just letting the moment pass. BIA treated it that way, eventually answering with her own track, Sue Me? The same song whose old preview clip would go on to reignite everything nearly a year later. Once both sides have released actual diss records, there's really only one rung left. Direct, unfiltered, real-time confrontation, which is exactly what last Thursday's X Spaces session was. For a stretch after that, things actually looked like they might be cooling. In an October 2025 Hot 97 interview, BIA said she was choosing peace over more back and forth, specifically regarding her long dynamic with Nicki Minaj, and generally signaled she was ready to step back from active dissing. Cardi responded on her own X Spaces days later, walking through her side of the ghostwriter dispute and the Missy Elliott sampling argument in detail, but notably without launching a fresh attack. That same month, BIA finally released her long-awaited debut album, Bianca, on Epic Records, nearly a decade after first signing with Pharrell Williams' label, a genuine professional milestone that had nothing to do with Cardi at all. Then, in June of 2026, Cardi performed at the BET Awards and worked a chunk of Pretty and Petty into her set, including a pointed line about awards BIA doesn't have, delivered on a stage where Cardi herself picked up another win that same night. But immediately afterward, on Instagram Live, she told her own fans to go easy on BIA. A moment of restraint that doesn't fit neatly into either a pure attack or a pure ceasefire. That contradiction, escalating in the official material while asking her fanbase to stand down in the comments, has basically defined how this entire feud actually moves. It cools in public statements and reignites the second either side feels disrespected again, which is exactly what happened this past week. It's worth noting that 2024 wasn't just the year this particular beef sharpened. It was a genuinely unusual stretch for hip-hop conflict overall, with Ice Spice and Latto trading shots, Nicki Minaj and Megan Thee Stallion locked in their own bitter public feud, and Drake and Kendrick Lamar producing what became one of the most consequential rap beefs in a generation. Cardi and BIA's tension didn't erupt in a vacuum. It erupted into a hip-hop landscape where public conflict between women in the genre specifically was already dominating timelines and driving real commercial attention, which likely raised the incentive, intentional or not, for any beef to actually go public rather than stay quiet. Fan reaction to last week's Spaces session split in a few predictable directions, and it's worth separating what's actual sentiment from what's just speculation dressed up as insight. A large portion of the response simply took sides, the kind of reflexive fandom war that shows up under literally any celebrity conflict. A smaller, more interesting thread of commentary focused specifically on Cardi's claim about Offset and BIA's unnamed friend, with some fans pointing out that if true, It would mean Cardi had been sitting on that information for years before finally going public with it during an unrelated beef and questioning why now was the moment she chose to reveal it. That's a fair question to raise. It's also just a theory. Nobody outside the people directly involved actually knows why Cardi held that claim until this specific moment, and treating fan speculation about motive as though its confirmed strategy would be getting ahead of what's actually known. There's one more piece of this worth understanding, because it's the closest thing to an actual stated line either woman has drawn. In a Breakfast Club interview last year, Cardi explained why she'd chosen to escalate the conflict into an actual diss track after years of smaller shots, and her answer wasn't really about the music at all. She said the moment that changed things for her was BIA bringing her children into it. Cardi said she wants to be able to tell her kids, when they're old enough to see all of this online, that she stood up for them when it happened. Whatever you think about the rest of this feud, that's a meaningfully different kind of line than a sample dispute or a chart comparison, and it helps explain why Cardi's response to a single defensive tweet last week came out as forcefully as it did. To her, this was never really about who sampled Missy Elliott first. So where does it actually stand right now? Cardi has denied the cheating rumor, made a new, unconfirmed allegation of her own about her ex-husband and an unnamed friend of BIA's, and said there's more coming, possibly on her next album. BIA has denied the one specific claim aimed directly at her being involved with Offset herself, while standing by everything else she's already put on record. Neither woman has walked anything back as of the most recent posts available, and neither has fully engaged with the other's biggest new claim. This is now the third distinct cycle of this exact pattern in 3 years, an outside trigger, usually something neither woman actually started, a public explosion that goes well beyond the size of whatever set it off, a partial retreat that looks like peace but never actually resolves the underlying claims, and enough unresolved tension left sitting underneath it that it only takes one reply to a stranger's tweet to set the whole thing off again. Notice what's actually never happened across 3 full years of this. Neither artist has sat down with the other, on a call or anywhere else, and settled the 2 claims that keep resurfacing, the cheating rumor and the ghostwriter accusation. Everything gets litigated in public, in fragments, aimed as much at each side's own fan base as at each other, which is exactly why it never actually resolves. A private conversation could end this in an afternoon. A public one, apparently, cannot, given that history. The real question isn't really whether this cools down again. It probably will, the same way it has twice before, likely once the news cycle moves on to whatever comes next. It's whether either of them actually has something concrete enough to end it for good, or whether BIA and Cardi are simply going to keep doing this every few months for the rest of both of their careers. 2 artists who were never supposed to be rivals in the first place, still fighting over a beef that technically started with somebody else. What do you think it would actually take to end this one for real?